Katie Johnson was a 31-year-old woman living in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She was known throughout her community for her warm personality and incredible talent for baking. Katie was the owner and operator of Sweet Treats, a popular local bakery that had become a neighborhood staple. Her shop was famous for its delicious cakes, especially her renowned chocolate chip cookies and pumpkin spice muffins, a modern treat beloved by millennials everywhere. Katie had a loyal customer base, many of whom had been visiting her bakery since it first opened. Katie was married to Albert Johnson, a 35-year-old financial advisor. They had been married for 5 years after meeting at a friend's wedding, and on the surface, their life seemed perfect. They lived in a cozy one-story house, not far from the bakery, and were well-liked in the community. Katie often donated cakes and other baked goods to local schools and events like the annual Minneapolis Christmas Parade. However, in the months leading up to her death, Katie had begun to feel a growing sense of unease. She noticed that Albert had become distant, often coming home late from work and showing little interest in their marriage. Even after Katie, who had always dreamed of starting a family, was diagnosed with endometriosis, which made it difficult for her to conceive, Katie remained hopeful. She dedicated herself to her work, often staying late at the bakery to perfect new recipes. In August of 2018, Katie was preparing for the busy holiday season. She had just started planning the bakery's Halloween-themed products, which were always a big hit with customers. But even as she focused on her business, Katie couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong in her personal life. She tried to talk to Albert about her concerns, but he always dismissed them, leaving Katie wondering what was really going on. Friends and customers described Katie as sweet, generous, and hardworking. She was the kind of person who would go out of her way to help others, and her warm smile was a comfort to all who knew her. Her death would leave a void in the community that would be hard to fill. On August 15, 2018, at approximately 7:30 in the morning, the lifeless body of Katie Johnson was discovered in the kitchen of her home in Minneapolis. It was a warm Sunday morning, and the city was just beginning to wake up. Katie's neighbor, Karen Simmons, a 56-year-old retired teacher, was the one who found her. Karen had noticed that Katie's bakery, Sweet Treats, hadn't opened on time that morning. This was unusual, as Katie's bakery was almost always filled with customers eager for her famous cookies and cakes. Worried, Karen decided to check on Katie. She walked the short distance to Katie's house, which was just around the corner from the bakery. When she arrived, she found the front door slightly ajar, which immediately set off alarms. Katie was always careful about locking the door, especially after a few burglaries had been reported in the neighborhood earlier that year. Karen hesitated, but then pushed the door open and called out Katie's name. There was no response. She entered and noticed an eerie silence. The house was neat and tidy except for the kitchen. When Karen entered the kitchen, her heart sank. Katie lay on the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood. The rolling pin that Katie always kept on the kitchen counter was on the floor next to her, stained with blood. The scene was horrifying. The warm and cozy kitchen where Katie had baked so many treats was now a crime scene. Karen was in shock but managed to dial 911. Her hands trembled as she gave the dispatcher the address and explained what she had found. She stayed on the line until the police arrived, trying to hold back tears. Karen later told investigators that Katie's face was so badly injured that she could barely recognize her. When the police arrived, they found Karen waiting outside, visibly shaken and in tears. She could hardly speak, and the officers had to help her to a nearby bench so she could sit down. The neighborhood quickly filled with rumors about Katie's death, leaving everyone in disbelief. How could such a kind and sweet woman meet such a violent end? When the Minneapolis Police Department received the 911 call on August 15, 2018, officers arrived at the scene within minutes. The responding officers were Sergeant Maria Diaz, a 42-year-old veteran known for being thorough and compassionate, and Officer James, a 28-year-old who had only been with the department for 3 years but was eager to learn. They quickly secured the area, placing yellow crime scene tape around Katie Johnson's small one-story home. The quiet neighborhood, typically filled with the aroma of freshly baked goods from Katie's bakery, was now dominated by the flashing lights of patrol cars and the hum of emergency radios. As they entered the house, the officers were struck by the eerie silence. The living room was untouched, with cozy furniture and framed wedding photos of Katie on the walls. But as they approached the kitchen, the scene changed drastically. The kitchen, once a place of warmth and comfort, was now a gruesome crime scene. Katie's body lay in the center of the room, her blood splattered across the white tile floor, and the rolling pin, a symbol of her love for baking, lay nearby, covered in blood. Sergeant Diaz's experience began to kick in as she assessed the situation. The scene indicated a violent struggle. Chairs were overturned and a mixing bowl had fallen to the floor, spilling its contents. Katie's apron was stained with blood, and her hands showed defensive wounds, suggesting she had fought hard for her life. Officer James took photos of the scene as Diaz carefully noted the details. The forensic team arrived shortly after, led by the medical examiner Dr. Lillian Pang, a 55-year-old woman with decades of experience. Dr. Pang examined the body and noted that Katie had suffered multiple blunt force trauma injuries to the head and estimated the time of death to be between 10 p.m. and midnight the night before. The brutality of the attack shocked everyone present, including the experienced investigators. Outside, news of Katie's death spread quickly. Neighbors gathered, whispering in disbelief. Many of them knew Katie personally, having bought her baked goods for years. The sight of patrol cars and the knowledge of what had happened inside the house left the community in shock and mourning. As the investigation progressed, the police focused on gathering every piece of evidence they could find. They knew the crime scene held the key to solving this brutal murder. They needed to figure out who could have committed such a heinous act against a beloved member of the community. The investigation into Katie Johnson's murder quickly turned its focus to her husband, Albert Johnson. Albert, 35 years old, was a well-known financial advisor in Minneapolis. To his clients, he was the epitome of professionalism, calm, reliable, and trustworthy. He had a solid reputation in the community, often seen at networking events and charity functions. However, behind closed doors, Albert was very different, angry, and with an insatiable sexual appetite that his wife could never satisfy. He was a man of secrets, deeply unhappy with his life and marriage. In the days following Katie's death, investigators delved into Albert's personal life. They discovered that the Johnsons' marriage had been strained for some time. Katie's endometriosis diagnosis had not only devastated her dream of starting a family, but had also put immense pressure on the sexual aspect of their relationship. Albert had grown frustrated and began spending more time at work and less at home, often returning late at night or after unexplained absences of several days. His colleagues noticed that he seemed stressed, but Albert brushed off their concerns, saying they were just personal issues. The real bombshell came when police discovered Albert's affair with Katie's own mother, Angie White. Angie, who had re-entered Katie's life only a few years prior, was 48 years old and still possessed a charismatic charm and overwhelming sexuality that her somewhat reserved daughter couldn't match. The affair had started as harmless flirting, but quickly escalated into something much more serious. Albert and Angie had been secretly meeting for sexual encounters, even doing so in Katie's bed when she wasn't home. The affair shocked the investigation, painting a picture of a man caught between a troubled mother-daughter relationship and a tangled web of deceit. During his interrogation, Albert initially denied any involvement in Katie's murder. He maintained that he had been at the office working on a client's portfolio and had come home to find Katie already dead. However, as detectives pressed him about his secret sexual relationship with Angie, Albert's calm demeanor began to unravel. He became defensive, insisting that the affair had nothing to do with Katie's death. But when detectives confronted him with evidence of his infidelity, including explicit text messages and nude photos sent between him and Angie, Albert's composure collapsed. The police noted that Albert's behavior was suspicious, his responses were evasive, and he struggled to provide a clear timeline of his actions on the night of the murder. Investigators also found it odd that Albert showed little emotion when talking about Katie's death, often referring to her in a detached manner as if she were just another person he'd read about in the news. Despite his attempts to distance himself from the crime, Albert's affair with Angie provided a strong motive for the murder. The pressure on Albert was mounting, and detectives were determined to get to the truth. As the investigation into Katie Johnson's murder progressed, the police turned their attention to Angie White. Angie, Katie's mother, 48 years old, had a complicated history that raised several red flags for detectives. She had re-entered Katie's life only a few years earlier after spending decades living a freewheeling and often reckless lifestyle. Angie had moved from Oakland, California to Minneapolis to reconnect with her daughter, but her arrival brought more turmoil than healing. Angie was an attractive woman who had always enjoyed being the center of attention. Even in her late 40s, she maintained a youthful appearance and a magnetic personality that drew people to her. After giving birth to Katie at the young age of 17 and leaving her in the care of her own mother when Katie was just a child, Angie had spent years drifting from job to job and relationship to relationship. She had worked as a house painter in Oakland, where she was known for her bold fashion choices and colorful personality. Angie's life took a dramatic turn when she joined a cult known as the Sunshine Family in the late 1990s, a decision that led to her losing contact with Katie for nearly 2 decades. When Angie finally reappeared in Katie's life, it was clear she hadn't changed much. She was still the same flirtatious, attention-seeking woman she had always been, and she quickly became a disruptive force in Katie's marriage. Angie openly flirted with Katie's husband Albert, even going so far as to kiss him in front of her daughter. This behavior further strained the already fragile mother-daughter relationship. During her interrogation, Angie was candid about her affair with Albert, admitting that the sex she had with him was wonderful. She described the relationship as a passionate and consuming romance that had given her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Angie justified her actions by insisting that Albert was sexually unsatisfied in his marriage, and that she was simply offering him the excitement and satisfaction he craved. To Angie, the affair wasn't just a fling but a deep and meaningful connection that she believed was meant to be. However, Angie denied any involvement in Katie's murder, claiming that she had been home on the night of the crime, watching Real Housewives and drinking a glass of red wine. Her tone during the interrogation was defiant, almost as if she believed her actions were justified. Detectives noted that Angie showed little remorse for the affair and seemed more concerned about how the revelation of the relationship would affect her than about her daughter's death. Angie's lack of empathy and her affair with Albert made her a strong suspect, but there was no direct evidence linking her to the crime. Despite her claims of innocence, investigators remained unconvinced and continued to scrutinize every move she made in the investigation into Katie Johnson's murder. The police also turned their attention to a third suspect, Carlos El Escorpión Rodriguez Garcia, 22 years old, was a figure with a notorious reputation in Minneapolis. Originally from Tamaulipas, Mexico, Carlos had a long criminal record that included robbery, assault, and drug-related charges. His nickname, El Escorpión, reflected his slippery and dangerous nature. Carlos was known to be a rough and intimidating presence in the community. He had been spotted near Katie's bakery several times in the weeks leading up to her murder, sparking rumors about his possible involvement in some criminal activity in the area. Witnesses reported seeing him lurking around the neighborhood, often dressed in dark clothing and keeping to the shadows. He was the kind of person who made people nervous, someone who always seemed on the verge of violence. When the police brought Carlos in for questioning, they were prepared for a difficult interrogation. However, Carlos surprised them by maintaining his innocence. He claimed that he had nothing to do with Katie's murder and had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. According to Carlos, he had been in the area to meet up with some old neighborhood friends who had recently immigrated to the United States not to cause trouble. He insisted that he had never met Katie and had no reason to harm her. During the interrogation, Carlos's behavior was defensive. He was angry and frustrated, ranting at the detectives who questioned him. He accused them of targeting him because of his criminal past and Mexican nationality, calling the investigation a witch hunt. Despite his protests, the police remained suspicious of Carlos, as his violent history and proximity to the crime scene made him a person of interest. However, as the interrogation continued, it became clear that there was little evidence linking him directly to Katie's murder. There were no witnesses who could place him at the scene at the time of the crime, and there was no physical evidence connecting him to the murder. While his presence in the area was suspicious, it wasn't enough to charge him. Carlos was eventually released, but the police kept a close watch on him, aware that his volatile nature and criminal record made him a potential threat. As the investigation into Katie Johnson's murder dragged on without a clear suspect, frustration began to set in among the detectives. But on the morning of August 18, 2018, a breakthrough occurred when Angie White made a shocking revelation that changed the course of the case. During a follow-up interview with detectives, Angie revealed that she was pregnant, and the father was none other than her own son-in-law, Albert Johnson. This revelation stunned the police, adding a new layer of complexity to an already tangled web of relationships. Detectives knew that this revelation could be the key to understanding the motive behind Katie's brutal murder. The news of Angie's pregnancy was a bombshell, suggesting that the affair between Angie and Albert wasn't just a fling, but something much more serious. Armed with this new information, the police intensified their investigation. They decided to re-examine the crime scene and the evidence collected earlier, hoping to uncover details that had been overlooked. On August 20th, 2018, 2 days after Angie's confession, detectives returned to the house where Katie had been murdered. Inside, the crime scene remained eerily intact, a grim reminder of the violence that had occurred there. The detectives carefully combed through the area, focusing on the rolling pin that had been used as the murder weapon. Forensic experts reanalyzed the rolling pin, searching for traces of DNA or fingerprints that might have been missed during the initial examination. Meanwhile, detectives also turned their attention back to Albert Johnson. Armed with the knowledge of Angie's pregnancy, they began piecing together a timeline of events leading up to Katie's murder. They discovered that Albert had been increasingly anxious in the weeks leading up to the crime, distancing himself from both his wife and Angie. He had also made several unusual mistakes at work, which coworkers attributed to his distracted mental state. Could Albert have known that Angie was pregnant with his child? And could Katie have discovered this shocking secret? The breakthrough came when detectives uncovered a series of deleted text messages on Albert's phone, which they were able to recover with the help of forensic computer experts. These messages revealed a heated argument between Albert and Katie on the night of her death. In the messages, Katie confronted Albert about his affair with Angie, adding a baby emoji, and Albert, in a panic, admitted to the relationship. The argument quickly escalated, and Albert's final message suggested he was going to fuck her to death. With this new evidence, the police had what they needed to directly link Albert to the murder. The messages provided a clear motive. Albert had killed Katie in a desperate attempt to escape the repercussions of his affair and Angie's pregnancy. On August 21st, 2018, after discovering the incriminating text messages and learning of Angie's pregnancy, the police were confident they had enough evidence to arrest Albert Johnson. Albert, 35 years old, was a successful financial advisor in Minneapolis, known for his calm and composed demeanor. However, beneath the surface, he was a man consumed by his own secrets and sexual desires. His affair with his mother-in-law, Angie White, and the news that she was pregnant with his child had pushed him to the breaking point. Detectives decided to approach Albert at his home, a modest residence in a quiet Minneapolis neighborhood. They arrived just after 8 p.m., knowing Albert was likely to be home. The air was thick with tension as they knocked on the door. When Albert opened it with the television playing parenting videos in the background, he appeared tired and on edge, a stark contrast to the composed image he usually projected. The lead detective informed Albert that they needed to speak with him about new developments in the case. Albert hesitated but allowed them inside. The detectives wasted no time in confronting him with the evidence they had recovered: the text messages, Angie's pregnancy, and the clear motive that had emerged. As they laid out the details, Albert's calm facade began to crumble. At first he tried to deny everything, claiming the messages had been taken out of context and that he and Katie had simply had a marital argument like any other couple. But when the detective mentioned Angie's pregnancy, Albert's expression changed. The color drained from his face, and he became visibly agitated, pacing the room and avoiding eye contact. Realizing the police had him cornered, Albert finally broke down. He confessed to the affair and admitted that on the night of Katie's murder, he had lost control when Katie confronted him about the affair. After Angie had literally shown Katie the positive pregnancy test, he panicked and, in a fit of rage and desperation, grabbed the rolling pin from the kitchen counter and beat her to death. He explained that he believed removing Katie would somehow solve his problems, allowing him to start a new life with Angie and their unborn child. The detectives arrested Albert on the spot, reading him his rights as they handcuffed him. Albert did not resist. His head hung in resignation as the police led him out of the house. Neighbors gathered on their porches, shocked to see the man they knew being taken away for such a brutal crime. Albert's extended family, devastated by the news, struggled to understand how their once loving husband and son-in-law could have committed such a heinous act. For them, Albert's arrest marked the beginning of a long and painful journey toward justice. Albert Johnson's trial began on December 30th, 2018, in Bexar County Court in Minneapolis. The case quickly drew local media attention from KSA 12 and the Minneapolis Express News. Reporters lined up outside the courthouse, eager to cover every detail of the shocking murder case involving a respected financial advisor, his wife, and her mother. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Lisa Perez Bruto, a sharp and no-nonsense prosecutor known for her methodical approach in the courtroom. Perez Bruto painted a chilling picture of Albert as a man driven to murder by the pressure of his affair with Angie White and her unexpected pregnancy. She argued that Albert, unable to face the consequences of his actions, brutally killed Katie in a desperate attempt to escape his crumbling life. The prosecution's case rested on the recovered text messages from Albert's phone, the revelation of Angie's pregnancy, and Albert's confession to the police. They called multiple witnesses to the stand, including forensic experts who testified about the murder weapon, the rolling pin, and how the injuries on Katie's body indicated a violent, prolonged attack. Perez Bruto also brought in colleagues of Albert, who testified about his erratic behavior in the weeks leading up to the murder, adding to the image of a man spiraling out of control. On the defense side, Albert's lawyer, Mark Caldwell, attempted to paint Albert as a man under extreme emotional distress. Caldwell, known for his ability to sway juries with a compassionate approach, argued that Albert had never intended to kill Katie. Instead, he claimed the crime was a tragic accident, the result of a heated argument that spiraled out of control. Caldwell urged the jury to consider Albert's previously clean record and the intense stress he had been under due to the affair and impending fatherhood. Throughout the trial, the Johnson family, along with friends and members of the community, attended the courtroom proceedings. Katie's family sat in quiet mourning, listening to the gruesome details of her death and the events leading up to it. It was clear the case had taken an emotional toll on everyone involved. Albert's mother-in-law, Angie White, testified as a key witness for both the prosecution and the defense. On the stand, she admitted to the affair with Albert and the pregnancy. Her demeanor was unapologetic as she described their relationship, painting it as a mutual attraction fueled by passion. However, Angie denied any involvement in Katie's murder and claimed she had no knowledge of what Albert had planned that night. Her testimony left the courtroom divided, with some jurors showing clear distaste for her behavior while others focused on Albert's actions. The trial lasted 2 weeks, and after hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. On January 7, 2019, Albert Johnson was found guilty of first-degree murder. The evidence, particularly the incriminating text messages, the testimony about the affair, and Albert's confession was overwhelming. Judge Catherine Ellis sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Albert stood silently as the sentence was read, his once calm demeanor completely shattered. The verdict brought some sense of closure to Katie's family and friends, though the pain of losing her so violently remained. For the community of Minneapolis, the trial marked the end of a tragic chapter, but the scars left by the murder lingered. Sweet Treats, the beloved bakery Katie had built, was closed permanently after her death, leaving a hole in the neighborhood that would never fully heal. As for Angie White, the trial had exposed her as a central figure in the scandal, though she was not charged with any crime. The public revelation of her affair with Albert and her role in the events leading to Katie's death made her a pariah in the community. Unable to continue living in Minneapolis, Angie moved away, hoping to rebuild her life far from the scrutiny and judgment of those who knew her. She ultimately decided to give the child up for adoption, believing it was the best option given the tragic circumstances surrounding its conception. Albert Johnson's life in prison began at the William P. Hobby Unit in Minnesota, a far cry from the comfortable life he had once known as a successful financial advisor. Inmates and guards alike knew his story, and his reputation as a man who had murdered his wife for an affair with her mother followed him wherever he went. His days behind bars were spent reflecting on the decisions that had led him to this point, but no amount of introspection could undo the damage he had caused. For those who had known Katie, the loss was immeasurable. Her death had not only robbed the community of a kind-hearted woman and talented baker, but it had also left a lasting reminder of how a seemingly perfect life could be shattered by lies and betrayal. The Johnson case would be remembered in Minneapolis for years to come, a haunting story of love, deceit, and murder that left a permanent scar on everyone involved. Edward Scott was only 18 years old, full of dreams and hope for the future. He lived in Middleburg, a quiet suburb in the state of Virginia. Edward was a senior at West Anderson High School, where he excelled both academically and in the auto shop. He had a true passion for cars, spending hours working on engines, dreaming of one day opening his own auto repair shop. His friends often saw him with grease-stained hands, tinkering with old cars in his driveway. Edward lived with his grandmother, a woman who had gone blind and needed his daily care. Despite his age, Edward took on that responsibility with a maturity beyond his years. He balanced school, a part-time job at a local garage, and caring for his grandmother without complaint. People in the neighborhood often commented on his kindness, noting how he always made time to help anyone in need. Edward had been dating Edith Peterson for 2 years. Edith, also 18 years old, was an intelligent and ambitious young woman who shared his dreams of a bright future. They talked about getting married after graduation and starting a family. Edward often saved money to take Edith to nice places like Cafe Bull, where they dreamed of their future while enjoying a good meal. The couple was inseparable, and everyone expected them to have a long and happy life together. But beneath the surface, there was a dark secret. Edward was having an affair with Edith's mother, Alicia Peterson, a 43-year-old woman who ran a multi-level marketing company called Beauty Buys. Alicia was attractive and successful, but had a complicated relationship with her daughter, often competing with her for the attention of men. Edward's affair with Alicia was a secret that weighed heavily on him and complicated his life in ways he had not anticipated. Despite his dreams and plans, Edward's life took a tragic turn. His secret affair would soon lead to a violent and gruesome end, leaving the Middleburg community in shock and his loved ones devastated by the loss of such a young man with so much potential. On the morning of August 12, 2022, Middleburg, Virginia, already felt the oppressive heat of summer. Around 8 o'clock, Edward's grandmother, Coralia, noticed something was wrong. Coralia, blind and dependent on Edward for her care, hadn't heard him moving around the house that morning. Worried, she called out to him, but there was no response. Sensing that something was amiss, and despite her disability, she managed to call her neighbor, Mrs. Haven Taylor, for help. Mrs. Taylor, a retired nurse who lived just 2 houses away, rushed over. She had known Edward since he was a child and couldn't imagine that something was seriously wrong. But as soon as she entered the house, she felt a chill. The living room was eerily quiet, and there was an unusual metallic smell in the air. Mrs. Taylor called out for Edward, but the house remained silent. She followed the smell to Edward's bedroom. When she pushed open the door, the scene before her was unimaginable. Edward's lifeless body lay sprawled on the floor, practically floating in his own blood. He had been brutally stabbed multiple times, and his eyes were nearly gouged out. The knife, still dripping with blood, lay on the floor beside him. Mrs. Taylor froze in shock, her hand trembling as she dialed 911. Her voice, usually calm and reassuring, was shaky as she described the scene to the operator. "Oh, Sheriff, there's blood everywhere," she stammered. Within minutes, police and paramedics arrived at the modest single-story home on West Midway Avenue. The flashing lights and the crowd of neighbors gathered outside added to the surreal atmosphere. When the first responders entered the house, they were met with a horrific scene that would haunt them for years. Mrs. Taylor, who had initially tried to stay calm, was now visibly shaken, leaning on another neighbor for support. Coralia, still seated in her chair in the living room, kept asking what was happening, unaware of the horror just a few rooms away. The once quiet neighborhood had become the epicenter of a brutal crime, one that would leave everyone in shock. The Middleburg Police Department arrived at Edward Scott's house within minutes of Mrs. Taylor's 911 call on the morning of August 12, 2022. Leading the investigation was Detective Johnson, a 20-year veteran known for his no-nonsense approach and dedication. Johnson was a respected figure in the department. Accompanying him was Detective Martinez, a younger officer with a sharp mind and a keen eye for detail. As they entered the house, the crime scene was immediately overwhelming. The bedroom, once cozy, was now a macabre spectacle. Blood splattered the walls and floor, creating a chaotic pattern that told the story of extreme violence and desperation. The smell of iron permeated the air, mixing with the stifling August heat. Edward's body lay crumpled on the floor, the brutality of the attack evident from the multiple stab wounds and the attempt to gouge out his eyes. The kitchen knife used in the attack, a common but deadly weapon, was found beside him, covered in blood. Despite his years of experience, Detective Johnson couldn't help but feel a knot in his stomach as he surveyed the scene. He knew immediately that this wasn't a random act of violence. The ferocity of the attack suggested something deeply personal. This wasn't just a murder, Johnson thought. It was a crime of passion. Martinez began photographing the scene, carefully documenting every detail. They meticulously collected evidence, ensuring nothing was overlooked. The knife, the blood patterns, and any fingerprints were carefully recorded. Forensics would later analyze these elements to reconstruct the sequence of events. As they worked, the detectives also took note of the state of the rest of the house. The living room, where Edward's grandmother Corelia remained seated, was untouched, in stark contrast to the horror in the bedroom. This indicated that the attack had been swift, catching Edward off guard, possibly during his morning routine. Outside, neighbors had gathered, murmuring among themselves as they tried to comprehend the tragedy that had struck their quiet community. Detective Johnson knew the importance of acting quickly. He assigned officers to canvass the neighborhood, hoping that someone had seen or heard something out of the ordinary. In a tight-knit place like Middleburg, where everyone knew each other, there was always the possibility that someone had noticed something that could crack the case. The first suspect on Detective Johnson's list was Alicia Peterson, the mother of Edward's girlfriend, Edith. Alicia was 43 years old and had always been the center of attention in Middleburg's social circles. She was known for her striking appearance and her successful multi-level marketing company, Beauty Buys, which sold cosmetics and skincare products. Some locals whispered that her business was a scam, but Alicia dismissed the criticism, enjoying the financial rewards and the spotlight. Alicia had a complicated relationship with her daughter Edith. Though they seemed close, friends noted an underlying tension between them, often stemming from Alicia's jealousy of Edith's youth and beauty. Alicia had a habit of competing with her daughter for attention, especially from men. This rivalry took a dark turn when Alicia began an affair with Edward Scott, her daughter's boyfriend. The affair was a closely guarded secret known only to the two of them, as it was the kind of secret that could destroy lives. Alicia justified the relationship as a way to reclaim her lost youth, but it was clear that she was becoming dangerously obsessed with Edward. When Detectives Johnson and Martinez brought Alicia in for questioning, she was visibly shaken but tried to maintain her composure. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored pantsuit, her makeup flawless, but there was a nervousness in her eyes that did not go unnoticed. The detectives began with routine questions, asking her about her relationship with Edward and her whereabouts on the night of the murder. Alicia claimed that she had been home alone, working late on her business. Her voice was firm, but there was a hint of hardness in her tone. When asked about Edward, she described him as a beautiful boy, but downplayed their relationship, referring to him simply as her daughter's boyfriend. However, as the interrogation progressed, her facade began to crack. When Johnson pressed her about the affair, Alicia's demeanor changed. She became defensive, her responses short and curt. At first she denied the affair, but when presented with evidence of the romance, Alicia broke down. Tears streamed down her face as she confessed to the relationship, though she vehemently denied having anything to do with Edward's murder. "He was my angel," she sobbed. "God is my witness, I would never hurt him." Despite her emotional outburst, Detective Johnson remained unconvinced. Alicia's obsession with Edward and the intense jealousy she felt toward her daughter made her a prime suspect. The second suspect in the investigation was Edith Peterson, the 18-year-old daughter of Alicia and Edward's girlfriend. Edith was a bright and ambitious young woman who had just graduated from high school in June of 2022. She was excited to start college in the fall, with plans to study business administration at the University of New Orleans. Friends and family described Edith as a kind-hearted girl, but at times overshadowed by her mother's dominant personality. Edith and Edward had been dating for 2 years, and by all accounts they were deeply in love. They had even talked about getting married after Edith finished high school, a plan that excited both families in a conservative Southern community, where the average age for marriage was 18. However, the revelation of her mother's affair with Edward shattered Edith's world. The discovery of the betrayal left her devastated and furious, but she maintained her innocence regarding Edward's death. When detectives brought Edith in for questioning, she appeared emotionally exhausted. She was dressed in jeans and a t-shirt from her senior class, and she looked much younger than she was, almost childlike in her grief. Detective Johnson and Detective Martinez began the interrogation gently, asking her to describe her relationship with Edward and how she had discovered the affair. Edith's voice trembled as she spoke, her eyes filled with tears. She described how she had accidentally found sexually explicit text messages between her mother and Edward a few days before his death. That discovery had led to a heated argument between her and Alicia, but Edith claimed she had tried to move past it. "I loved Edward and didn't want to lose him," she said in a barely audible voice. However, when asked about her whereabouts on the night of the murder, Edith's story became less clear. She insisted she had been at a sleepover at her friend Taylor's house, just a few blocks from Edward's home, but she struggled to provide details of the night. Taylor, when interviewed separately, confirmed that Edith had been there, but mentioned that Edith had left around midnight, a few hours before the estimated time of the murder. As the detectives pressed Edith, her demeanor shifted from sadness to defensiveness. She denied any involvement in Edward's death, but the anger in her voice was evident. "I would never hurt him," she repeated, though her hands shook as she spoke. When shown evidence of the affair, including the explicit messages Alicia had sent to Edward, Edith broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Her pain was palpable, but it also raised doubts. Was she crying over the loss, or was there something more she was hiding? Despite her emotional state, Edith maintained her innocence throughout the interrogation. She admitted to feeling betrayed and angry, but insisted she wasn't capable of murder. However, her unclear alibi and the intensity of her emotions left Detective Johnson with lingering doubts. The third suspect in the investigation was Richard Golly Peterson, the father of Edith Peterson and the husband of Alicia Peterson. Richard, 47 years old, was a successful lawyer locally known as an ambulance chaser, due to his reputation for taking personal injury cases. He was well known in Metairie, Virginia for his sharp legal mind and his ability to win cases, but also for his tendency to be absent at home due to his demanding work schedule. Richard was a man who valued appearances. He took pride in maintaining a perfect family image, even if it meant turning a blind eye to the problems brewing under his own roof. While Richard was often away at the office or in court, he wasn't entirely unaware of the tension and sexual games between Alicia and Edith. He had suspicions about Alicia's behavior, particularly her inappropriate sexual interest in other men, but chose to ignore it, hoping it would resolve itself. When police called Richard in for questioning, he arrived composed, dressed in a white shirt and tie as if preparing for a day in court. Detective Duval and Detective Martin began the interrogation by asking Richard about his relationship with his wife and daughter. Richard described his marriage to Alicia as complicated, but insisted they had a strong bond and maintained regular sexual relations. He claimed his relationship with Edith was also good, though he admitted they weren't as close as he would have liked, partly due to his long work hours. The detectives then shifted focus to Edward. Richard admitted that he liked Edward and thought he was a good match for Edith. However, when confronted with the romance between Edward and Alicia, Richard's demeanor changed. He clenched his jaw and avoided eye contact, clearly uncomfortable with the subject. He claimed that he wasn't aware of the romance until after Edward's death, saying, "If I had known, I would have put a stop to it immediately." The detectives pressed Richard about his whereabouts on the night of the murder. He stated that he had been working late at his office reviewing a case file for an upcoming trial. He provided the names of colleagues who could confirm his alibi, but his tone was defensive. Richard's response to the interrogation was calm but distant, giving the impression that he was holding back. As the questioning continued, Richard maintained his innocence, insisting he had nothing to do with Edward's death. However, his reluctance to discuss the romance and his apparent detachment from the situation left the detectives uneasy. Was Richard truly ignorant of his wife's actions, or was he hiding something to protect his family's reputation? Despite his calm exterior, Richard's evasiveness during the interrogation raised suspicions. The detectives couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story than he was revealing. On a hot afternoon in mid-August 2022, the police received a tip that would change the course of the investigation. It was around 3 o'clock when Detective Duval's phone rang. The caller, who wished to remain anonymous, claimed to have crucial information about Alicia Peterson, one of the main suspects in Edward's murder. The informant hinted at something more sinister than just a romance, a secret Alicia had been hiding for years. The detectives wasted no time. They headed straight to Alicia's office, located in a nondescript building on the outskirts of Metairie. The sign above the door read, "Beauty Buys," the name of the multi-level marketing MLM company Alicia had been running for nearly a decade. From the outside, the office looked like any other small business, but inside the detectives would discover a shocking twist. As they entered the office, the detectives were struck by the silence. The place was filled with beauty products, shelves lined with creams, lotions, and makeup, but there were no employees in sight. Detective Martin noticed a locked door at the back of the office. After some persuasion, Alicia's assistant, a nervous young woman in her 20s, reluctantly handed over the key. Behind the door was Alicia's private office, and what the detectives found inside was both disturbing and revealing. The walls were covered with photographs, many of them nude pictures of Edward, most of them sexually explicit and inappropriate. In one corner there was an improvised altar dedicated to him, with candles, charms, and handwritten notes. It was clear that Alicia's obsession with Edward had gone far beyond a simple romance. But that wasn't all. As the detectives searched the office, they stumbled upon a stack of documents exposing the dark side of beauty buys. The scam wasn't just a business, but a scheme that preyed on impoverished Southern women, many of whom were single mothers struggling financially. The documents revealed that Alicia had been exploiting these women, convincing them to invest thousands of dollars in beauty products they couldn't sell, while forcing them to work up to 20 hours a day to pay off their debts. The financial pressure had ruined hundreds of lives, leaving these women in despair. The discovery of Alicia's fraudulent practices provided a new motive for the murder. Alicia's world was beginning to crumble, and the pressure to maintain her image, combined with her obsessive love for Edward, might have driven her to commit murder. With this new evidence, the police had a clearer picture of Alicia Peterson, a woman who would do anything to protect her secrets, even if it meant committing murder. The detectives knew they were getting closer to the truth, but they also realized that uncovering the full extent of Alicia's crimes wouldn't be an easy task. On August 21, 2022, the police in Metairie, Virginia, were finally ready to act. After piecing together the evidence, including the disturbing findings in Alicia's beauty buys office, they had no doubt about who was responsible for Edward's brutal murder. Alicia, 43 years old, had become increasingly sexually obsessed with her daughter's boyfriend, leading her to commit an unthinkable crime. Alicia Peterson was known as a charismatic and successful businesswoman, running a multi-level marketing company called Beauty Buys. But behind her polished exterior, Alicia hid dark secrets. The investigation revealed that she had been having an affair with Edward for several months. When Edward tried to end the romance to focus on his relationship with Alicia's daughter, Edith, Alicia's obsession turned deadly. On the night of the murder, Alicia confronted Edward in the kitchen of his grandmother's house, a place where Edward had taken Alicia many times for sexual encounters. Driven by jealousy and fear of losing control, Alicia grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed Edward multiple times. The attack was brutal, leaving him with deep wounds and nearly gouging out his eyes. After the murder, Alicia tried to cover her tracks, but her obsession with Edward and her fraudulent business dealings eventually led the police straight to her. The arrest took place in the early hours of the morning on August 21st. The police arrived at Alicia's luxurious home in a quiet suburban neighborhood just as the sun was rising. They knocked on the door, and Alicia answered, still dressed in her silk pajamas, clearly not expecting visitors. The detectives calmly informed her that she was under arrest for the murder of Edward. Alicia's reaction was a mix of shock and defiance. She tried to maintain her composure, but the police could see the panic in her eyes. As Alicia was handcuffed and led to the patrol car, her neighbors watched in disbelief. Many of them had admired Alicia for her business success, unaware of the truth behind her glamorous exterior. News of her arrest spread quickly through the community, and by the time the patrol car drove away, the streets were buzzing with gossip. Back at the station, Alicia was booked and placed in a holding cell. The detectives interviewed her, but she denied everything, insisting she was innocent. However, the evidence against her was overwhelming, and the police were confident they had the right person. The arrest brought a sense of relief to Edward's family, who had been living in fear and uncertainty since his death. The case was far from over, but with Alicia Peterson in custody, the police were one step closer to achieving justice for Edward. Alicia Peterson's trial for the murder of Edward began on November 8, 2022, in the Jefferson County Courthouse in Metairie, Virginia. The case drew significant media attention, with local outlets like the Times-Picayune covering every detail. The courtroom was packed with spectators eager to witness how the trial would unfold. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Mark Tremble, a seasoned lawyer known for his tenacity, painted a damning portrait of Alicia as a woman driven by jealousy and obsession. Tremble, 52 years old, had a reputation for being thorough and relentless in the courtroom, and this case was no exception. From the outset, he argued that Alicia had brutally murdered Edward in a fit of rage after he attempted to end their affair. Using physical evidence and testimony from investigators, Tremble also revealed the fraudulent nature of beauty buys, Alicia's multi-level marketing scheme, adding to the image of her as a manipulative and dangerous woman. On the defense side was Benjamin Lee, a sharp and experienced lawyer with a talent for sowing doubt in jurors' minds. At 48, Lee was known for his calm demeanor and skillful defense of high-profile clients. He argued that the evidence against Alicia was purely circumstantial and suggested that someone else, possibly Edith Peterson, might have committed the crime. Lee also worked to humanize Alicia, portraying her as a loving mother and successful businesswoman who had been unfairly targeted by both the media and the prosecution. As the trial progressed, the emotional toll on Edward's family became increasingly apparent. His grandmother, who had raised him, attended every session, clutching a worn photograph of Edward in her hands. His girlfriend, Edith Peterson, sat with her father, both visibly shaken by the legal proceedings. The tension in the courtroom reached a fever pitch when the lead detective took the stand, detailing the gruesome nature of Edward's injuries and the evidence linking Alicia to the crime. On November 22, 2022, after 2 weeks of testimony and just 4 hours of jury deliberation, the verdict was delivered. Alicia Peterson was found guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict was met with tears of relief from Edward's family, while Alicia remained stoic, though her face visibly paled as the word guilty echoed in the courtroom. The sentencing took place on December 1, 2022, and Alicia was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The harsh sentence was a fitting end to a case that had shocked the community. For Edward's family, the verdict brought a sense of justice, but the pain of losing him would never fully heal. The trial also exposed the darker side of Alicia's business dealings, leading to further investigations into beauty buys and its practices. The sentence marked the end of one chapter, but it left many in the community reflecting on the tragedy and its lasting impact. After the trial, life in Metairie, Virginia slowly returned to normal, but the shadow of Edward's murder continued to hang over the community. The once busy neighborhood, where everyone knew each other's business, had been forever changed. The Peterson home, once vibrant, became eerily quiet. Alicia's life sentence left a void in the family that was hard to fill. Her husband, Richard Golly Peterson, a successful lawyer, tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, but the scandal and loss weighed heavily on him. He continued his work but withdrew from social circles, avoiding the curious stares and whispered conversations that followed him everywhere. Edith Peterson, Alicia's daughter, struggled to move on. The revelation of her mother's affair with Edward and the brutal murder had torn her world apart. She left Metairie shortly after the trial, enrolling in a university out of state to escape the painful memories. Though she tried to focus on her studies, the trauma never fully left her mind. Friends noted that she had become more withdrawn, no longer the bright and ambitious young woman she had once been. The trial's impact also extended to the wider community. Beauty Buys, Alicia's multi-level marketing company, came under intense scrutiny. Investigations revealed the full extent of the financial and emotional harm caused by the company, leading to its eventual closure. Many of the women who had invested in the business were left in debt, their lives ruined by the scam. Local media outlets such as WWL-TV continued to cover the aftermath, and the scandal became a cautionary tale about the dangers of predatory businesses. In the end, the trial and its consequences left a lasting mark on everyone involved, serving as a tragic reminder of how quickly lives can be torn apart and how the actions of one person can ripple through an entire community. Emily Evans was a 40-year-old woman living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She was a homemaker and also worked part-time as an internet marketer. Emily was known for her lively personality and her strong commitment to her family. She had a husband named Izan, who was 43 years old, and 2 children, Greg, who was 12, and Blake. Emily was very close to her family and friends, and she had built a successful career working from home, helping small businesses improve their online presence. She was very good at what she did and enjoyed helping others succeed. Her work had been featured on local business websites and in Aaron Trevon's book. Emily's husband, Izan, owned a fishing tour company, To the outside world, he seemed to be a devoted husband and father. However, as we will discover later, Izan had many secrets. Emily was very active in her community. She volunteered at Blockpine Crest School and was part of the Parent-Teacher Association. She helped organize school events and fundraisers. She also loved baking and often brought cookies and cakes to school events and community meetings. In the days leading up to her death, Emily was busy planning a family vacation to Disney World. She was eager to spend quality time with her family. Emily also had dreams of expanding her internet marketing business. She was working on a new project for a local restaurant and was excited about the possibilities it could bring her. To many, Emily's life seemed perfect. She had a loving family, a successful career, and was well liked in her community. However, everything changed in March 2016 when she discovered a dark secret about her husband's double life. This discovery would lead to her tragic and premature death. On the morning of March 18, 2016, around 8 o'clock, Jackson, Emily Evans' next-door neighbor, made a shocking discovery. Jackson, a retired police officer, was taking his usual morning walk when he noticed something strange at Emily's house. The garage door was partially open, which was unusual for the typically orderly and cautious Emily. Curious and concerned, Jackson approached the garage. As he got closer, he saw a pool of blood on the ground. His heart raced as he looked inside. There, lying motionless on the cold concrete, was Emily, who had been brutally attacked, her body covered in blood. Jackson's years of police training kicked in. He quickly assessed the scene, noticing a tire iron near Emily's body, which was likely the murder weapon. Jackson immediately called 911, his voice firm but filled with urgency. He then waited outside the garage to ensure nothing was disturbed, keeping a careful watch over the scene until the authorities arrived. The sound of sirens filled the air as the Milwaukee Police Department rushed to the scene. The garage was a horrific sight. Blood splattered across the floor and walls, evidence of a violent struggle. Emily's body showed signs of a brutal attack, with multiple wounds suggesting she had fought with all her strength against her attacker. Detectives carefully documented the scene, taking photographs and collecting evidence. They noted the position of the tire iron and collected DNA samples for analysis. As they worked, neighbors began to gather outside, whispering in shock and disbelief. News of Emily's death spread quickly through the community, leaving everyone stunned. Detectives interviewed Jackson, who described how he had discovered the body. His calm, detailed account helped detectives piece together the initial timeline of the crime. Inside the house, Emily's children were still asleep, unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded just outside their door. Detectives ensured the children were taken to a safe place and arranged for them to stay with family members. As the investigation began, the Milwaukee community was devastated by the loss of the beloved mother and friend. When the Milwaukee Police Department's investigation team arrived at the scene, it was around 8:15 in the morning on March 18, 2016. The team, led by Detective Jaden Parker and Detective Diaz, quickly got to work. Detective Parker, known for her meticulous attention to detail, and Detective Diaz, with his sharp instincts, were determined to solve the case quickly. The garage where Emily Evans' body was found was a gruesome scene. Blood splattered on the walls and floor, indicating a violent struggle. Emily had been beaten to death with a tire iron which lay nearby, covered in blood. The scene suggested a sudden and brutal attack, with no signs of forced entry, indicating that she likely knew her attacker. The detectives first secured the area, ensuring no one contaminated the crime scene. They documented everything with photographs and detailed notes. Forensic specialists arrived and began collecting evidence, including the tire iron, fingerprints, and DNA samples. They also took samples from various surfaces to search for any traces of the attacker. Detective Parker noticed the chaos in the garage: an overturned toolbox, scattered papers, and a broken family photo. These details were crucial as they painted a picture of the struggle Emily had endured. The detectives also found Emily's mobile phone, which they hoped would provide more clues about her final moments. As the investigation continued, the detectives moved inside the house. They searched the home for additional evidence or signs of forced entry, but found none. This reinforced their belief that Emily knew her attacker. Detectives Parker and Diaz interviewed the neighbors, including Jackson, who had discovered the body. Jackson provided a detailed account of his morning routine and how he came upon the horrific scene. His calm demeanor and clear observations were invaluable to the investigation. The detectives also gently spoke with Emily's children, Greg and Blake, ensuring they felt safe. The children were taken to a relative's home away from the traumatic environment. The detectives contacted Izan Evans, Emily's husband, who was at his office. His reaction was noticeably composed, which raised some initial suspicions. Detective Parker and Detective Diaz reviewed security footage from nearby homes, hoping to find any clues or suspicious activity around the time of the murder. They also planned to analyze Emily's phone records and social media for any unusual interactions or threats. As the day progressed, the detectives remained focused and determined. They knew solving Emily Evans' murder was crucial for the grieving family and the shocked community. Every piece of evidence, no matter how small, was vital in their pursuit of justice. The first suspect in Emily Evans' murder was her husband, Izan Evans. At 43, Izan owned a fishing tour company in Milwaukee. To everyone who knew him, he seemed like a devoted husband and father. He was meticulous, introverted, and kept his personal life private from everyone, including his family. However, as detectives began to dig deeper, they discovered that Izan had been hiding many things. Izan had been having an affair and was also in serious financial trouble. His fishing tour company, which seemed successful on the surface, was struggling. He had taken out several loans and was facing mounting debt. These secrets painted a different picture of the man who seemed so dedicated to his family. Detectives Parker and Diaz brought Izan in for questioning on the afternoon of March 18, 2016. Izan appeared calm, but his demeanor was distant. He denied any involvement in Emily's death and claimed he had been at his office during the time of the murder. However, his calmness seemed suspicious to the detectives, given the brutal nature of the crime and the loss of his wife. Izan's alibi was weak. He said he was alone at his office working on paperwork, but he could not provide solid evidence to support his whereabouts. Detectives Parker and Diaz pressed him about his affair and financial troubles. Izan admitted to the affair but insisted he had nothing to do with Emily's murder. He became slightly agitated when discussing his financial problems, but he maintained his innocence throughout the interrogation. The detectives also examined Izan's phone records and emails. They found numerous calls and messages between him and his lover Anastasia, coincidentally Emily's best friend. This connection added another layer to the investigation and gave the detectives more questions about Izan's possible motives. Neighbors and friends were interviewed, and many were shocked to learn about Izan's double life. They described him as reserved and noted a sharp contrast with Emily's outgoing personality. Some neighbors mentioned seeing Izan acting nervously in recent weeks, raising more red flags. The detectives knew they needed more evidence to implicate or clear Izan. They continued to analyze his financial records for a link to the crime, and also planned to interrogate Anastasia to see if she knew anything more about Izan's potential involvement in Emily's murder. As the investigation progressed, Izan Evans remained a key suspect. His secrets and strange behavior kept detectives on high alert, knowing that unraveling his story was crucial to solving the case. The second suspect in the investigation was Anastasia, Emily Evans's best friend and colleague. Anastasia was 43, ambitious and known for her competitive nature. She had worked with Emily on several internet marketing projects and had shared many personal details about her life. Little did Emily know that Anastasia was also having an affair with her husband, Izan Evans, a fact that put her under intense scrutiny. Anastasia and Emily had been close friends for years, sharing not only professional interests, but also personal struggles. Anastasia had confided in Emily about her troubled marriage, which had created a bond between them. However, the revelation of her affair with Izan suggested a more complicated relationship, possibly filled with jealousy and rivalries. On March 19, 2016, detectives Parker and Diaz brought Anastasia in for questioning. Anastasia was visibly shaken but cooperative. She admitted to the affair with Izan but claimed she had nothing to do with Emily's murder. She described her relationship with Emily as mostly supportive, though she acknowledged moments of tension, especially when discussing their respective marriages. Anastasia's motive could stem from several factors. Her affair with Izan was a significant betrayal of Emily's trust, and if Emily had discovered it, it could have led to intense conflict. Additionally, Anastasia's ambitious nature and desire for success could have led to envy and resentment. During the interrogation, Anastasia was defensive but not overly aggressive. She answered the detectives' questions, though she was careful with her words. She boasted to the police that Izan had told her he planned to leave Emily, and that their relationship would soon become official. This added another layer to the investigation, as it suggested that Anastasia might have felt threatened by Emily's presence in Izan's life. Detectives Parker and Diaz also examined Anastasia's phone records and emails. They found numerous messages between her and Izan discussing both personal and professional matters. Some messages hinted at their plans for the future, complicating the case further. Friends and colleagues of Anastasia were interviewed, and many expressed surprise at her involvement with Izan. They described her as a driven, career-focused person, but were shocked to learn of the affair. Some mentioned that Anastasia seemed more stressed and withdrawn in recent months. The detectives knew that while Anastasia's affair with Izan was significant, it didn't directly link her to Emily's murder. They continued to gather evidence, hoping to uncover more about her role in the events leading up to Emily's death. Anastasia's actions and motives remained a critical piece of the puzzle, keeping her firmly at the center of the investigation. On March 21, 2016, around 3 in the afternoon, the Milwaukee Police Department received a major breakthrough in the case. The weather was clear and warm, typical for Wisconsin. Detective Jaden Parker was at the station when a forensic analyst named Lisa Kiang called her with urgent news. They had found new evidence that could significantly impact the investigation. The evidence was discovered during a detailed analysis of Emily Evans' mobile phone. Forensic experts recovered deleted text messages between Emily and an unknown number. The messages revealed that Emily had uncovered a shocking secret. Her husband Izan was running a secret gambling and human trafficking operation. Emily had planned to go to the police with this information, providing a clear motive for her murder. Izan's fishing tour company was actually a front for an underground gambling and human trafficking ring, a kind of brothel casino. There, Izan entertained his wealthy male clients with roulette, slot machines, and young men and women, mostly from Eastern Europe, who had been lured to America with promises of modeling jobs. Detectives Parker and Diaz immediately recognized the significance of this new evidence and quickly convened a team meeting to discuss the findings. The messages were explicit, detailing Emily's shock and her determination to expose Izan's illegal activities. This information provided a clear motive for Izan to silence Emily. The detectives reviewed the messages and noted the dates and times. Emily had discovered the operation just days before her murder. The urgency in her messages indicated that she was afraid and felt the need to act quickly. This revelation added a new layer of complexity to the case and strengthened the suspicion against Izan. Detectives Parker and Diaz also noticed that some of the messages mentioned a woman named Madison. Emily had been in contact with Madison, who had traveled from Chelyabinsk, Russia, to confront Izan about her missing daughter, Anastasia. Anastasia had been lured to America with promises of a modeling career, but she ended up trapped in Izan's trafficking operation. The police also intensified their efforts to trace Izan's financial records and communications, hoping to uncover more evidence linking him directly to both the trafficking operation and Emily's murder. The detectives reached out to federal agencies for assistance, knowing that the case had now expanded beyond a simple domestic incident. As the investigation progressed, the new evidence gave the detectives a clearer picture of the motive behind Emily's murder. Izan's secret and illegal life lay at the heart of the case. The detectives remained focused and determined, knowing that uncovering the full extent of Izan's operations was key to solving Emily's murder and bringing justice to her family. The third suspect in the investigation was Madison. Madison was 61 years old and had traveled from Chelyabinsk, Russia, to find out what had happened to her daughter, Anastasia. Anastasia was only 18 when she came to America, believing she would be working as a fashion model. Instead, she became a victim of Izan Evans' secret gambling and trafficking operation. On March 22, 2016, detectives Jaden Parker and Diaz brought Madison in for questioning. Madison was visibly upset and determined to seek justice for her daughter. She spoke through a translator, explaining how Anastasia had disappeared shortly after arriving in the United States. Madison had tried everything to find her daughter, even hiring private investigators, but all the clues led back to Izan Evans. Madison described her daughter as very ambitious and full of dreams. Anastasia was excited about her modeling career and looked forward to a new life in America. When Anastasia stopped communicating, Madison knew something was terribly wrong. Her determination to uncover the truth led her to sell everything and fly to Wisconsin to confront Izan directly. During the interrogation, Madison was emotional but composed. She recounted how she had met with Emily Evans in the days leading up to Emily's murder. Emily had been sympathetic and promised to help Madison expose Izan's operation. This meeting had taken place just 2 days before Emily's death, making Madison a key witness. Madison's motive for wanting to confront Izan was clear. She wanted answers about her daughter's disappearance and was willing to do anything to get them. However, the detectives found no evidence linking Madison to Emily's murder. Her emotional state and detailed account of her search for Anastasia painted her as a grieving mother rather than a suspect. The detectives continued to press Madison for more information about Izan's operations. Madison revealed that she had gathered documents and records about Izan's illegal activities, hoping to use them to pressure him into revealing Anastasia's whereabouts. She handed these documents over to the detectives, providing crucial evidence to further the investigation. Friends and acquaintances of Madison in Russia described her as a determined and loving mother. They said she was tireless in her search for Anastasia and had exhausted all resources to find her. Her trip to America was her last hope of uncovering the truth. With all her testimony and the documents she provided, Detectives Parker and Diaz had more evidence to connect Izan to both the trafficking operation and Emily's murder. Madison's involvement highlighted the international reach of Izan's crimes and the widespread impact of his actions. As the investigation progressed, Madison remained a crucial part of the case. Her unwavering determination to find justice for her daughter and her cooperation with the detectives brought them closer to uncovering the full extent of Izan's criminal activities. After piecing together all the evidence, the Milwaukee Police Department identified Izan Evans as Emily's killer. Izan, who was 43 years old, owned a fishing tour company, but his seemingly perfect life hid a dark secret. His business was a front for illegal gambling and human trafficking. Izan's motive for killing Emily was clear. Emily had discovered his secret life and planned to expose him to the authorities. Fearing the collapse of his personal and professional life, Izan decided to silence her permanently. The police gathered enough evidence to arrest Izan, including phone records, financial documents, and the deleted text messages between him and Emily. At 10 in the morning, detectives Jaden Parker and Diaz arrived at Izan's office. The atmosphere was tense as they approached. Izan was in a meeting discussing his business plans when the detectives entered. They calmly informed him of his arrest. Izan's reaction was a mix of surprise and resignation. He did not resist but maintained his innocence, claiming he was being framed. The detectives handcuffed Izan and read him his rights. They then escorted him out of the building where a crowd of onlookers and media had already gathered. News of the arrest spread quickly through the community, leaving everyone in disbelief. Emily's family was devastated but relieved that the police had finally identified her killer. The Milwaukee community shared their grief, mourning the loss of a beloved mother and friend. The police continued their investigation to ensure they had a solid case against Izan, uncovering more details about his illegal activities and linking him to the gambling and trafficking operation. The evidence painted a clear picture of a man desperate to protect his double life, willing to do anything to keep his secrets hidden. Izan's arrest was a significant step toward justice for Emily, and it also gave hope to Madison, who was still searching for answers about her daughter Anastasia. The police assured Madison that they would continue investigating Izan's criminal network, hoping to find more victims and bring them to justice as well. Izan Evans's trial began on August 1, 2017 in Milwaukee. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Karen Whitfield, known for her tenacity and sharp sense of justice. Karen, who was 38, had a reputation for being tough on crime, and was determined to hold Izan accountable for Emily's murder and his other illegal activities. The prosecution's case focused on the mountain of evidence against Izan. Karen presented the deleted text messages between Emily and Izan, financial records showing his debts, and testimony from several witnesses, including Emily's family and friends. The jury listened intently as Karen detailed how Izan's secret life had driven him to kill his wife to prevent her from exposing his illegal activities. On the defense side was lawyer Richard Palmer, a 43-year-old man known for his sharp legal mind and calm demeanor. Richard argued that Izan was being framed and that the evidence was circumstantial. He attempted to discredit the validity of the text messages and suggested that other people involved in Izan's illegal operations had more to gain from Emily's death. During the trial, Emily's family was present, their faces marked by both grief and determination. They watched every moment, hoping for justice. Michelle, Emily's sister, often wiped away tears as she listened to the details of her sister's final days and the brutality of her murder. The trial lasted 3 weeks, with both sides presenting compelling arguments. However, the prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. On August 24, 2017, the jury delivered a unanimous verdict. Izan Evans was found guilty of first-degree murder, illegal gambling, and human trafficking. During the sentencing hearing, the judge condemned Izan's actions and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was filled with a mix of relief and sadness. Emily's family felt a sense of closure, knowing that Izan would spend the rest of his life in prison, but the pain of losing Emily remained. The verdict had a profound impact on the Milwaukee community. Many felt that justice had been served, but the case also highlighted the dark side of illegal activities that can exist in seemingly peaceful neighborhoods. It served as a reminder of the importance of vigilance and community support. For Emily's friends and family, the sentencing marked the end of a painful chapter. They found solace in the fact that Emily's courage in uncovering the truth had not been in vain. The community rallied around the Evans family, organizing fundraisers and tributes in Emily's honor. Her children, Greg and Blake, were placed in the care of their extended family and continued attending school at Kusa Elementary, where teachers and counselors provided additional support. The children struggled with the loss of their mother, but they were gradually adjusting with the help of therapy and their supportive relatives. Madison, who had traveled from Russia in search of her daughter Anastasia, found some closure with Izan's conviction. Although Anastasia had not been found, Madison continued her efforts to raise awareness about human trafficking. She collaborated with organizations like the Polaris Project and participated in awareness events to shed light on the issue. Her activism helped draw attention to similar cases and supported other families facing similar tragedies. Anastasia, who had been a suspect but was later exonerated, faced a challenging path as well. The revelation of her affair with Izan and her connection to the murder impacted her personal and professional life. She took a leave from work and eventually moved away from Milwaukee to start fresh. Her former colleagues and friends offered support, though the affair and its consequences left a lasting mark on her reputation. Izan Evans' trial left a lasting impact on Milwaukee. It highlighted the dangers of hidden criminal activities and the importance of community vigilance. Emily's courage in uncovering Izan's secrets led to his arrest and conviction, but the ripples of the case continued to affect many lives. Over time, the community worked to heal and remember Emily for her bravery and commitment to justice. Her story remained a powerful reminder of the strength of the human spirit and the ongoing fight against injustice. The tragic story of Emily Evans serves as a clear reminder of the dangers of hidden lives and the devastating impact of secrets.